Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Let me make sure I am up. I'm seeing green on my end, so I am going to take it as an act of faith that everything is going the way everything is supposed to be going. And yeah, I see myself moving and shaking. Let me make sure my sound is good. I checked this in the beginning of the video because sometimes between videos the sound level drops. I don't know why, but it does. Alright guys, a story came across the Twitter feed that I want to discuss. Julian Assange is being assailed on a few ends. Now, for those of you who don't know, and I don't necessarily know why anybody would know, Julian Assange has been in the Ecuadorian embassy for the past 5 years because they've been trying to, well, Julian Assange believes that the moment that he steps out that Ecuadorian embassy, he's going to be arrested and he's going to be ferreted off to the United States where he could be tortured and probably anally raped by other prisoners. And before you say, whoa, dude, that's kind of beyond the pale, are you shitting me? You understand that that's somewhat of a franchise in the United States prisons. You know, it's most rape, believe it or not, it's done by men. It's done by men. 2 other men. So, I am not crazy for saying that. Actually, I need to fact check that. I think that's true. If I'm not mistaken, that's true. All I'm saying is nobody wants to be sent to an American prison and brutalized in the American prison. Now, I say that to say that the Ecuadorian embassy has come out saying, look, this position of him being here is unsustainable. We can't necessarily do this in perpetuity for life. And it's trying to have mediation to, I guess, resolve the situation. Now, Sweden has a rape allegation against Assange. And I laugh at this because this is purely politically motivated. Or at least I very well believe this is politically motivated. That charge has been, I don't want to say to use the word rescinded. I don't know the legal term for it. But essentially he's not being looked for. Or they're not after him for that charge anymore. So for all intents and purposes, Julian Assange has nothing against him. Now, Britain say, we will still lock you up because you didn't go to court. Like, you essentially refused to go to a trumped-up court case. It's like, wait a minute, but the court case itself is no longer valid. Yeah, we don't care. We don't care. We're looking for anything to put you in an American prison. Let's look at the story. Ecuador is seeking possible mediation in a Assange case. Quito, Ecuador. Quito is beautiful, by the way. Quito is absolutely beautiful. I was there last year. Ecuador's foreign minister, that has nothing to do with this. Ecuador's foreign minister says the court is seeking possible mediation to resolve the case of Wikileaks founder Julian Assange, who has been in asylum at its London embassy for more than 5 years. Maria Fernanda Espinosa said at a news conference on Tuesday that notable asylum cases in recent years have sometimes required mediation by a third country. Assange has been at the embassy since June 2012, to avoid a Swedish extradition request on a case of alleged rape. While Sweden has at least temporarily dropped that investigation, British officials said that they'd arrest him on charges of bail jumping. Assange fears a possible U.S. extradition request stemming from leaking of U.S. classified documents. Espinosa said her country is seeking options or solutions, saying the situation is not sustainable. And look, the situation is not sustainable. For all intents and purposes, this is the de facto prison cell that he's been stuck in because he's terrified of being extradited. Anyone in their right mind should be terrified of being extradited and put in the United States prison cells, for the most part, torture. What they want him for is because Assange is serving a vitally useful, what's the word I'm looking for? He's serving a vital, useful function for the world, or for the people of the world. Not just any particular country, but people of the world. How do you know what your government is doing? How do you keep tabs on your government if you don't know what your government is doing? And that really is what this boils down to. Meaning, your government, just the body of people for the most part, gets his power from the people that it's supposed to be governing. Meaning you, me, Bob, Tom, Jones, Tyrone, etc. 300 million odd of us. And you take this from one country after the next. The power of the government comes from the people that are being governed. There's no God above that gives them that power. people came together to form a structure of a government. That government, for the most part, is not real per se. Those are agreements that people make, but the agreements that they make comes from this idea of we have the backing of 325 million people. Those 325 million people give us their blood and treasure. We can use that blood and treasure to murder other people, or we can use it to provide resources for the country itself. At the end of the day, though, governments do things in a non-transparent way because they understand that if the people who are supposed to be paying attention and controlling that government gets wind of it, that those people will be massively unhappy. When Snowden released that information showing that the United States government had mass surveillance, people didn't know that. People didn't know that. They may have assumed it, but they didn't understand the level to which the United States government was going in order to spy on each and every one of us. When they released documents showing that the CIA was putting bugs in television cameras, essentially your television was watching you while you were watching it, had bugged cell phones, computers, had bugged all of these devices, had the capacity to break into devices and make it look like some other country was doing the break-ins. They built an NSA inside the CIA because the CIA didn't necessarily want to have communications with the NSA. That was Wikileaks. When you found out that the Hillary Clinton campaign was cheating the Bernie Sanders campaign and then complained that they themselves were being cheated. That was Wikileaks. I mean, one disclosure after the next. Chelsea Manning showing that the United States military murdered a Reuters agent. That by itself was amazing, but the fact is they didn't know who they were out there murdering. You find out that the United States, some of these cases were up to 90%. Let's say it wasn't 90%. Let's say it was 70% of the people being hit were murdered were civilians. Are you okay with your government murdering that many people? At that point, you're not even killing terrorists. You're just murdering civilians. Wikileaks is vitally important. If you don't know what your government is doing, you can't have any controls over that particular government. When Obama was pushing the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and Wikileaks released the documents, allowing you to read the document, we didn't know that for the most part, these governments weren't supposed to disclose that document 4 years after that piece of legislation was passed. Understand what I'm saying. That bill was so gross and repugnant that the provisions in it was that you weren't supposed to release it to the public and let the public know that their governments had involved themselves in this until 4 years after it was passed. It was Wikileaks that gave you the capacity to read that god-awful document and allowed you to see that this wasn't a trade deal at all. Ultimately, this was the United States handing over its sovereignty to corporations or multi-corporations, multinational corporate interests. It's fucking amazing. That was Wikileaks. Wikileaks and Julian Assange's function in this world is vitally important, and that function in this world should be protected at all costs. I saw this today, another story about Wikileaks, showing the undermining of Julian Assange. Freedom of Press Foundation cuts WikiLeaks donations. Freedom of the Press was a foundation that was started by Julian Assange himself. The idea behind this was that we can't trust, or organizations such as ours that publishes documents showing government malfeasance needs to be protected and insulated from attacks from outside sources. Meaning one of the ways that stops organizations like WikiLeaks is cutting off its funding source. You need to eat, sleep, you need somewhere to stay, and meaning you need funding. Your operations, regardless of what those operations are, you're existing in a capitalist system, you need funding. If your funding source can be attacked, you can be choked off and destroyed. They understood this, so they created their own organization that would allow them to receive funding to maintain their support base as they go about their way of providing this vital function of showing malfeasance of governments around the world. FPF, Freedom of the Press Foundation, has decided to cut ties with WikiLeaks. They've decided to do this in a unanimous way. Now, this is fucking amazing. This is fucking amazing. Considering that some of the people on this include Edward Snowden and Glen Greenwald. People who have massively profited off of the information that WikiLeaks has been putting out and Julian Assange has been putting out. Let's read the story. My question here is somewhat basic and fundamental. Has Glen Greenwald abandoned Julian Assange? Meaning, when they took that vote, and that vote was unanimous, it looked, even if you make the vote that says you're cutting ties, Glen Greenwald raised this hand on this vote. This seems amazing to me. It seems amazing to me. I didn't even know who Glen Greenwald was until those files were released by WikiLeaks. Or I should say, those files or the information was given by WikiLeaks. Edward Snowden, WikiLeaks, Julian Assange. I guess what I'm saying is, has it gotten to the point where Glen Greenwald is essentially abandoning one of his contributors, or one of the people who assisted him in putting out information? I love Glen Greenwald. I think the man is a fucking lion. And most of the positions that Glen Greenwald take, I tend to agree with. When I've seen him in arguments, when I've seen him on TV, that was a recent one that I was going to do of Bill Maher, where he eats Bill Maher alive. Bill Maher looks clownish and cartoonish, more so than what he normally does. And that hack, Joanne Reed, was sitting right there beside him, not being able to say a word because Glen Greenwald was completely right. I'm going to show that one. Bill Maher had no response. Fucking idiot. Now, the point I'm getting with this is, a guy who I absolutely like, has he gotten to the point where he's cutting ties with the organization? Glen Greenwald, more than probably anybody else that I've seen, has been this freedom of the speech, free press advocate, this person who goes with this idea of integrity and journalism, and has been a lion for this stuff. Somewhat apolitical, and by apolitical it just means not affiliated with the parties. For the most part, he has a humanistic perspective in the way he goes about his affairs. Has Glen Greenwald abandoned WikiLeaks? Has he abandoned WikiLeaks? Let's take a look at the article. Well, it's official. If you're Julian Assange and your Twitter account goes missing for a few days, expect all-out pandemonium and a list of conspiracy theories longer than a Texas border. Meanwhile, if you're the most prosecuted publisher on the planet who has never had to issue a single retraction, and your funding is cut off by the very organization you helped to create specifically to make sure your funding isn't cut off, expect crickets. Okay, maybe not crickets, but the fact that there's very little said about the freedom of press announcement on Twitter almost 3 weeks ago, stating that the organization will no longer be accepting donations on the behalf of WikiLeaks after the 1st of this year, feels like unexpected silence. So for those of you who missed it because it didn't grab a lot of press headlines, let me give you a heads up on what's been happening. The Freedom of Press Foundation, the brainchild of Julian Assange and John Perry Barlow, decided to part ways with WikiLeaks, citing lack of evidence that WikiLeaks is suffering from a financial blockade. Assange addressed the FPF's move in a letter that had released on pastebin.com, but it did not stop the FPF's board from unanimously voting to cut ties with WikiLeaks. Unanimously. Michael Lee later stated that they would continue to fight for the freedom of information rights, First Amendment rights of WikiLeaks when they're threatened, which is the most absurd statement of the century, seeing that the FPF is now doing literally nothing to support Julian Assange, WikiLeaks, and his staff, all of whom have been facing threats from more sides than a Shay-Show megamix over the course of the last 7 years. Okay, this is a little over the top and wordy, but understand its point. Julian Assange helped start an organization. He helped start this organization purely to protect his funding source, meaning he wanted to make sure that WikiLeaks was impervious to outside attacks from people going after his funding source. This organization, after X number of years, have decided to part ways with the person who helped create the organization for the explicit reason of not having his funding source. Let's keep going. According to Assange's letter, the Freedom of the Press Foundation was established after he met with John Perry Barlow in 2011 at Frontline Club in London to discuss setting up an organization that would improve WikiLeaks' prospects for survival. At the time, WikiLeaks was facing banking blockade from financial giants such as Bank of America, Visa, MasterCard, Western Union, and PayPal. On October 24, 2011, they released a statement pointing out that the blockade started within 10 days after the 2010 Cablegate publication that had it eaten up 95% of their revenue. They went on to say that the attacks were part of a concerted U.S.-based political attack that included vitriol by senior wing politicians, including assassination calls against Wikileaks staff, and that the blockade was without democratic oversight or transparency. They also noted that the United States Secretary at the time, Treasury Secretary at the time, Timothy Geithner, announced that there would be no grounds to blacklist Wikileaks, and that there were no judgments or even charges against Wikileaks and its staff anywhere in the world. Again, understand what's being said. This is extra constitutional. There were no charges against WikiLeaks. There was nothing against WikiLeaks. And yet they were able to have all of these financial giants fall in line in order to disrupt their funding sources. What was the justification that they were using to cut their funding sources? For that matter, what is the justification that they're using, or that they would use, to extradite Julian Assange to the United States? There's been no charges against him. The United States has no jurisdiction over Julian Assange at all. He's an Australian citizen. Let's keep going. According to John Perry Barlow, the financial blockade was the shot heard around the world. This is Lexington, an online hacking collective. Anonymous enacted their revenge by launching Operation Avenge Assange on December 2010, a retaliatory denial of service attack against companies like MasterCard and Visa. According to The Guardian, attacks brought down both companies, and PayPal subsequently released WikiLeaks' frozen funds, one activist said. That's awesome. We will fire anything on anyone that tries to censor Assange, including multi-billion-dollar companies such as PayPal. Twitter, you're next for censoring WikiLeaks discussion. The major shitstorm has begun. That is fucking amazing. I love it. I love it. God damn, I love that. These guys said, if you try to censor him, we will destroy you. We will destroy you. We will come and get you. And showing that they meant it, they attacked those major financial organizations in order to punish them for trying to censor Julian Assange. Bravo. Brav-fucking-vo. And yet, here we are in 2018, and the only major shitstorm I see is the one being launched at WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. Activists that previously supported Assange over the years seem to be turning their backs on him, and it's astounding in light of some of the people who sit on the board of Freedom of the Press Foundation, like Edward Snowden, Laura Poitras, and Glen Greenwald. I mean, isn't this the dream team of the 2013 Snowden NSA days? Aren't these the people who have spoken out against government corruption, illegal surveillance, and free speech ad nauseum over the years? These are the ones who have seemed to stood by Assange's side for years, only to get caught up in the Russian narrative, the Trump collusion story, and the ridiculous notion that Assange is an alt-right fascist. Hello? G to space in Catalonia? What? I don't understand what that means. If bizarre comes to mind, you're not alone. It's definitely more bizarre than a small group of highly intelligent journalists and activists who have worked together in the same organizations, in the same board, and the same journalistic outlets that receive funding from many of the same sources seem to be buying a load of shit being shoveled by the deep state lock, stock, and barrel. Or is it? Ever since WikiLeaks' alleged source, former U.S. Bradley Manning, now known as Chelsea Manning, may have started communicating with him in late 2009, WikiLeaks has been seriously targeted, so the FPF's move to stop processing WikiLeaks donations seemed like an unusual walk in the park. I'm not going to go through this entire thing, but the point that he's making is, you have these lions who are in the free speech camp, who are in this camp of protecting journalists and the integrity of the journalistic endeavors, not to necessarily be controlled by state and government, but journalists who are in this camp of protecting investigative journalism. Those people are sorely missed, and those people are sorely needed. And he's making the point that how are these people involved in this? How are these people turning down Julian Assange? How are these people saying it is okay to let this guy go and to cut this guy loose? Julian Assange wrote a letter in response to the board of directors. His letter was long, and his letter just kind of made this point, like, look, I helped start this organization, And you guys are cutting me loose while we're in the middle of publishing these CIA files. And their response to him was, well, you're not being attacked anymore. The response is amazing. The response is amazing. Believing that Julian Assange and Wikileaks is not being attacked by the CIA and other state organizations is comically ridiculous. It's comically ridiculous. They're making an argument that their funding, that his funding is not being threatened anymore. Because his funding is not being threatened anymore, they can cut him loose. That makes no sense. That makes no sense. What I'm asking is, did Glen Greenwald raise his hand when they brought up the thing of cutting Julian Assange and Wikileaks loose? Did Edward Snowden raise his hand when they raised the issue of cutting Julian Assange and Wikileaks loose? Have both of these people come to the conclusion that Wikileaks and Julian Assange is no longer a vital part of the conversation from a journalistic standpoint? And understand, among all of the news outlets, among all of the people who are putting out information, the one organization that has never had to retract a story is Wikileaks. It's amazing. This is, let's see. Julian Assange responded to them cutting him loose. I'm not going to read his whole letter because the whole letter is so much long, but I will read this part. John and I felt strongly that donating to Wikileaks was an act of free speech and free association. The fundamental motivation of the FPF was not only to protect Wikileaks directly, but also to protect its readers' speech and associational rights in their act of donating to Wikileaks. FPF was also designed to litigate on behalf of Wikileaks and its donors. Its name was chosen for the impression that it would convey on the docket. The structure of FPF is the way it is because it's customized to counter political and legal pressure against Wikileaks, its donors, and upstream financial intermediaries. FPF was set up to anonymize Wikileaks donors by also collecting for other organizations that the financial records cannot be used to determine which organization received the funding from the donors. The FPF faces criticism for receiving donations on our behalf, but that is its function. He's making this point that, look, these guys are bowing to political pressure. And the whole point of the organization was to bear the brunt of that political pressure, to essentially protect the people who donated to WikiLeaks, with this idea that the donation to WikiLeaks was a custom or similar to this idea, this act of protecting free speech. Even before the FPF's letter, I had sought and obtained legal advice from my DC-based defense attorney, Barry Pollock, in relation to the possibility of setting up a 501c3 that could receive WikiLeaks contributions in the United States. I was not confident that all FPF board members would be able to stand the political pressure over our publications. WikiLeaks would never forego asserting its rights even in the face of such potential conflicts. Barry advised against setting up a 501c3 in the United States, as would increase the Department of Justice's ability to assert jurisdiction and hence make it easier to prosecute our staff. That's important. He's making this point that we couldn't set up an organization in the United States because free speech in the United States is somewhat of a myth. If we're putting out information that goes against what the government is doing, even if the government is doing something illegal like it was in the Snowden case, it doesn't matter. The government will go after you. That soldier that murdered that person in Iraq, that Reuters agent, the soldier didn't get in trouble. The person who released the information showing that soldier murdering an innocent person is the one that got in trouble. I'm talking about Chelsea Manning. They tortured the guy. Well, at the time, it was a guy. Paulson is a key factor in the imprisonment of Chelsea Manning and a confidant of Adrian Lamo. Paulson and Lee have both developed a secure drop. Have both been developers of Secure Drop. Paulson manipulated the alleged Manning Assange chant logs in an attempt to frame WikiLeaks. See, for example, Glen Greenwald's article, The Worsening Journalistic Disgrace at Wired, for more background. As the article puts it, at the heart of the WikiLeaks Manning saga lies the efforts of a self-proclaimed journalist, Paulson, to conceal the truth. This is the person Jordan used to publicize the move to cut WikiLeaks funding from its donor base in Lee's initiative. The hack shit rag of the Democratic Party, or the neocons, Daily Beast, put out an article by this person Paulson. This person Paulson, who's for the most part disgraced, even by Glen Greenwald's own standards, wrote a letter, or wrote an article showing that there was cutting ties between Wikileaks and FPF, and did so in this way that for the most part attacked Wikileaks. Most of the article was just an attack piece on Wikileaks. This is the person Jordan used to publicize the move to cut ties from Wikileaks and its donor base. When I learned that Jordan has been put on the board in December 2012, I sent a message to Tim. I have no recollection of ever meeting Xenia, and I have definitely never worked with her, and yet she goes around saying I have penning dozens of snide, unhelpful articles and boing boing about us. We've seen her as opponent for a long time based on those articles. Perhaps she shifted her politics in a new opportunity. I don't know, but her politics are not against anti-censorship. She's not anti-war. She's not anti-empire. I don't think she has any politics. She's an exhibitionist and a networker, and that's networker. What's to stop her from swapping sides when she gets the better offer? Be careful. This is what Assange wrote to them. Although I have never met her or communicated with Lee and know little about him, but research shows that starting in 2016, he has engaged in an online vilification campaign against Wikileaks and myself. See, for example, Julian Assange is a rapist, a liar, and an ally to fascists. I wonder now that Obama has commuted Chelsea's sentence, will Julian Assange shoot himself for U.S. extradition? These are the articles that the guy who got on the board of the organization that Julian Assange helped create is writing. Julian Assange is not a co-founder of Freedom of the Press. This is another lie. I know. I'm a co-founder. We can't trust them talking about Wikileaks. Assange's fall to bigotry. Oh, God. Wikileaks' Julian Assange also championed far-right conspiracy theories. This is all the stuff that this guy was writing about, and is on the board of the organization that Julian Assange helped to create. Like Garden, this is not the person who takes his legal and ethical responsibilities as an FPF board member or director seriously. FPF's founding purpose was to defend WikiLeaks, its donors, from prosecution, not contribute to it. The Lee initiative to cut WikiLeaks off from its donors is a sad business. Should FPF decide to cut WikiLeaks off, the timing, transfer, and auditing of the funds, the notifications sent to all past and current WikiLeaks donors, and how to deal with the monthly donors should be agreed between FPF and WikiLeaks. They responded to this with a very short letter. This week, FPF board unanimously found upon, well, I could just maybe show this. I don't have this in big lettering, and I copied this because the page that I got this from was just pasted. Should FPF decide to cut, let's see. This week, FPF's board unanimously found upon review of the available evidence that financial blockade for the major payment processor is no longer in effect, and such, we should cease processing donations on behalf of WikiLeaks. Readers, we consider the defeat of the financial blockade a victory for free speech rights. We are proud of the work we did over the past 5 years to see that WikiLeaks was able to receive so many donations from WikiLeaks readers it otherwise may have been unjustly lost. If a similar extrajudicial financial blockade is reinstated in the future, our board agreed WikiLeaks will be welcome to apply for protection again. They will be welcome to apply for protection. To make this transition as smooth as possible, we will keep the donation mechanism unchanged and open for the next 30 days. As you requested, I am happy to discuss with you how the remaining balance will be transferred to Wa Holland and how we will notify current and recurring WikiLeaks donors about the change when we can direct their donations to in the future, or issues related to the handoff. This decision has no bearing on FPF's position that WikiLeaks is entitled to robust First Amendment protections, as is every publisher, for publishing newsworthy information. We continue to strongly oppose any prosecution attempts by the United States government for WikiLeaks publishing activities. Understand, this is not the organization itself just taking money out of its own coffers. This is people donating and giving to the organization that Julian Assange helped start, with the idea that that money can be transferred to WikiLeaks in an anonymous way, protecting WikiLeaks from prosecution and attack by United States and some of the financial systems that are in the United States that they can use to try to strangle WikiLeaks by, is Glen Greenwald. Is Glen Greenwald abandoning Julian Assange and WikiLeaks? That is the question. That is the question I have for Glen Greenwald. Glen Greenwald is never going to answer this question because Glen Greenwald don't know who I am. But if in some weird night when he's in Brazil and he's just floating through the internet, one of these videos come up, I am immensely curious about this question. What is the reason or justification that they're using to abandon Julian Assange like this? Did Julian Assange help start this? Meaning, is Greenwald and Edward Snowden, would they say that Julian Assange did not help create this organization? And if they say that he helped create this organization, he helped create this organization for the explicit purpose of protecting the financial sources of WikiLeaks, at this point, why are you abandoning him? Why? That's what I want to know. So, let's see. I recently made a payment to them for WikiLeaks and will refund it immediately. God, no. We must also bear in mind that the WikiLeaks is 100% accurate is bullshit. You can mix truth with bullshit or incorrect data by simply reporting things that aren't unverifiable. You have to give me an example, dude. Glen Greenwald has used Julian Assange and Snowden like slaves, believe me, lower powers. I don't know about the slave thing. A Green Party of Santa Clara County. Money and media is what maintains the power of an empire. That is true, but money and media. Money is also important in getting this thing of journalism. I mean, call it what it is. It's real journalism. It's something that we don't necessarily have. And we don't have a press that's antagonistic towards the government. We do in this kind of shallow way with Donald Trump. But I'm talking about really looking into issues of state and empire, being somewhat critical of this kind of imperialistic drive of the United States. When you don't have that in the home country itself, it makes WikiLeaks all the more important. Don't forget Bill Clinton signed a Telecommunications Act that allowed media to become a monopoly, which is why the local news sounds like CNN. Yes, you're right. I'm not forgetting that. I'm not forgetting that at all. Bob Ramirez says, Sanders is the last... Sanders is the last hope of the politically incompetent. People cling to Sanders' clause out of desperation and naivety. I would say out of desperation, not naivety, but out of desperation, yes. Civil disobedience. Sanders supporting Assange publicly would be a stupid political decision. Sanders has a 60% approval rating, so he's doing fine. What would happen if he was become president is unknown. That's true. I have no idea how Sanders, what his position is towards WikiLeaks. Glen Greenwald was backing pornographic web pages before WikiLeaks. So what? Good for Glen Greenwald. Civil disobedience. If not Sanders, who? Oprah? Yeah, Bob Ramirez has some feelings about Sanders. Fair enough. I know a lot of people have some feelings about Sanders. Fair enough. Let's see. Jamal can't speak for us 99% with so many hats. What? I have plenty of hats. In my opinion, people gave too much credence to WikiLeaks. Each document must be vetted separately. There is no way to tell when it could be compromised. The way to push it into the mass media is suspected in itself. Okay. I mean, when you're putting out a lot of documents and people are reading through those documents, until they find something that says, this one is not true, this one is a lie, then, well, it becomes somewhat disingenuous to say that everything that they've put out at this point hasn't been shown to be false. I guess what I'm saying is, WikiLeaks has this argument of everything that we've put out up to this point has been found to be true. You can make a case to say, well, man, they've put out so much information, there's no way to vet each and everything. Fair enough. That doesn't change their argument. Until you show something that they've put out that's been false, then you can't challenge what they've said about everything that we've put out up to this point that's been true. We've had no retractions. That statement is a flat fact. Show me the document that is proven to be false. Let's see. J. Scott, is it true that Chink makes you wear skirts to work? To mostly young, well, more like disrupt you financially. Yeah, for the most part. For the most part. Let's see. Alex1239, what governments are messed with, rules are broken, I guess. What? When governments are messed with, rules are broken, I guess. Yeah, but you gotta show it. Like, the United States has no jurisdiction over what takes place in Australia. He's an Australian citizen. This idea that you're going to extradite Julian Assange and no laws have been broken is amazing. It's fucking amazing. My point in this is Wikileaks is vitally important and should be supported. Organizations that go with this idea of reporting on what goes on behind the scenes is vitally important. FPF should continue to support Wikileaks. They could continue to do what the organization was created and started for, the protection and the support of Wikileaks. This idea that Wikileaks is no longer under attack, so we're pulling away, is insanity. Wikileaks is in the middle of releasing a large trove of information right now as we speak. Saying that Wikileaks can quote-unquote apply again later if they're in any way threatened is insane. Wikileaks is continuously being threatened. I'm curious. Austrian. He's not Austrian, he's Australian. He's Australian. As far as I know, he's Australian. Somebody please fact check that for me. As far as I know, he's Australian. Yeah. I'm not gonna go this much too long. Garno. I say Wikileaks has been useful, but should be suspect and handled with caution. Agreed. No, that's true. I agree with that. Glen Greenwald dumping them is a bad sign. It is a bad sign. I am curious as to why, though. And this is one of those things where I want Glen Greenwald I want him to explain. I haven't been able to see anything where he gave an explanation. Timothy Young, yeah, he's Australian. He's Australian. Gardner, you're right. Just as a flat fact, everybody there should be skepticism in what people put out. Agree. Full-throated, agree. We were hand in hand in the sun on that one. I'm just saying, up to this point, it is vitally important to have information on what your government is doing. And investigative journalism is not necessarily something that prides in the United States. Hell, Obama had opened a department in government to go after these guys. So, in the White House, to go after investigative journalism, not to mention he was putting people in prison in the Espionage Act. It is important. That's my point. Yes, Gardner, scrutinize them. That's true. But let's understand their importance. I'm curious to know why Glen Greenwald is dumping them. And I find Glen Greenwald to be a person of integrity, and I find him to be somewhat, well, I think he's an awesome fucking guy. So, if he's dumping them, I am curious as to why. I would love to hear a statement from Glen Greenwald explaining why he's making the decision to dump Julian Assange. Not this fucking press release about dumping the guy. He helped you start that organization. You should support Julian Assange and Wikileaks. And if you're not going to support him, you should give an explanation as to why you're not going to support him. So, I want to hear about why Sith Lord Glen Greenwald revealed the deep state surveillance long predated the Patriot Act. Fair enough. That has nothing to do with us. I want to know why Glen Greenwald and Edward Snowden is making a decision to go hand in hand with that person who Glen Greenwald put a knife in earlier to dump Wikileaks and Julian Assange. So, I will leave it at that. I'm not going to let this one go too long. Yeah, I'm not going to let this one go too long. Alright, guys. If you enjoy the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support through Patreon. Thanks, guys. I may have one or two more after this, but the dog has a doctor's appointment, so I need to take a bit. Yeah, I'm going to leave it here. Alright, guys. You all have a good one. Thanks for showing up.